On the day I buried my parents, the only thing they left me was a public humiliation worth millions. My sister stood before 300 guests, holding the will like an executioner's sword, announcing I received $0 because I needed a lesson in humility. She laughed. But she made a fatal mistake. She did not know real power was gathering dust in my grandmother's old diary. My name is Fiona Hartwood, and I was invisible at my own parents' funeral. The wind off Lake Michigan was a physical assault, a biting, wet cold that cut through layers of wool and settled deep in the marrow of my bones. It was a typical Chicago winter afternoon, the sky the color of a bruised plum, hanging low and heavy over the cemetery. I stood at the edge of the freshly dug earth, my boots sinking slightly into the freezing mud, while 300 people pretended to mourn the passing of Richard and Eleanor Hartwood. I looked at the sea of black cashmere and Italian leather surrounding the grave. These were not friends. They were sharks in mourning attire. They were business partners, rivals, local politicians, and social climbers who had spent decades circling the Titanium Estates empire. Waiting for a drop of blood in the water, my parents were not people to them. They were institutions, pillars of the real estate market, and their deaths were simply a market fluctuation to be analyzed and exploited. I was 32 years old. I had spent the last 10 years running the property management division, the unglamorous engine room of the company. I knew the names of the janitors in our high-rises. I knew which boilers in the West Side complexes needed replacing. I was the one who signed the condolence cards when a tenant passed away. Yet, as I stood there, clutching a handful of damp soil, I felt utterly erased. No one offered me a handkerchief. No one put a comforting hand on my shoulder. They looked through me, their eyes darting around, searching for the true heir. And then, she arrived. A murmur rippled through the crowd, louder than the priest's prayers. A sleek black limousine pulled up onto the gravel path. Crushing the silence under its tires, the driver hurried to open the door. And my sister, Clarissa, stepped out. If I was the shadow, Clarissa was the blinding spotlight. She was 2 years older than me, but she looked as if she had stopped aging at 25. She wore a tailored black coat that probably cost more than my annual salary, cinched tight to show off her figure. Her sunglasses were oversized, hiding eyes that I knew were dry. She did not walk. She glided. A performance of grief so perfect it felt rehearsed. She bypassed me completely, walking straight to the front of the gathering. She threw a single white rose onto the casket, a gesture that looked beautiful for the cameras flashing in the distance, but felt hollow to anyone who knew the truth. Clarissa had not visited our parents in 4 years. She had been too busy living in Paris and Milan, spending the family trust on art galleries that never opened and fashion lines that never launched. Yet here she was, the grieving daughter, the crown princess returning to claim her kingdom. After the service, the procession moved to the Hartwood family manor in the Gold Coast district. It was a sprawling stone fortress of a house, filled with marble floors that echoed, and rooms so large they felt like museums rather than a home. The heating was on, but the air felt colder than it did outside. The reading of the will was scheduled to take place in the grand library immediately following the reception. The room smelled of old paper, polished mahogany, and the faint, lingering scent of my father's cigars. The family lawyer, Mr. Blackwood, sat behind the massive oak desk. He was a man who looked like a vulture that had learned to wear a suit, his eyes beady and devoid of empathy. The room was packed. It wasn't just family, it was the board of directors, key shareholders, and distant cousins I hadn't seen since childhood. Everyone wanted to know what would happen to Titanium Estates. I sat in a corner, my hands folded in my lap, trying to stop them from trembling. I didn't care about the empire. I just wanted to know that my parents loved me. I wanted to know that my decade of loyalty, of fixing their mistakes, of being the dutiful daughter while Clarissa partied across Europe, meant something. Mr. Blackwood cleared his throat. The sound was like a gavel striking a block. "I will now proceed with the last will and testament of Richard and Eleanor Hartwood," he announced. His voice was dry, a rustle of dead leaves. He began with the minor bequests, the charities, the domestic staff, the distant relatives. Then, the atmosphere in the room shifted, the air grew thick. We had reached the main assets. "To my eldest daughter, Clarissa Hartwood, Mr. Blackwood read, I bequeath the entirety of the Hartwood family estate, including the deed to the Gold Coast Manor, the vacation properties in Aspen and the Hamptons, and 100% of the controlling shares in Titanium Estates." A collective gasp went through the room, followed by a hum of whispers. Clarissa, sitting in the high-backed leather chair front and center, didn't flinch. A slow, satisfied smile spread across her lips, sharp and predatory. She crossed her legs, looking around the room as if she had just won a game of poker she knew was rigged from the start. My heart hammered against my ribs. Everything? They left her everything? "And, Mr. Blackwood continued, his eyes sliding over to where I sat in the shadows. "To my youngest daughter, Fiona Hartwood." He paused. He actually paused to take a sip of water. It felt like psychological torture. "I bequeath the sum of $0. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum that sucked the air out of my lungs. I felt the blood drain from my face. I gripped the armrests of my chair, my knuckles turning white. "However," the lawyer continued, "I have been instructed to read a personal letter addressed to Fiona from her parents, to explain this decision." He picked up a piece of cream-colored stationery. I recognized my mother's handwriting. I could almost hear her voice, critical and distant. "Fiona," the lawyer read aloud, projecting his voice so every shareholder could hear. "We love you, but we fear for you. You have always been too soft for this world. You prioritize feelings over facts, people over profits. You lack the killer instinct required to maintain the legacy we built. You are too idealistic, and in business, idealism is a weakness. We have decided that the best gift we can give you is a lesson in humility. You must learn to survive on your own, without the cushion of our wealth. Perhaps then, you will understand the value of $1 and the ruthlessness required to keep it." The words hit me like physical blows. Soft, weak, idealistic. For 10 years, I had cleaned up their messes. When they illegally evicted families in the winter, I was the one who found those people new housing out of my own pocket. When they cut corners on safety inspections, I was the one who stayed up for 48 hours straight coordinating repairs before anyone got hurt. They didn't see that as strength. They saw it as a liability. Clarissa stood up. She turned to face the room, then pivoted slowly to look at me. The theatrical mask of grief was gone. In its place was pure, unadulterated triumph. "Well," Clarissa said, her voice ringing out clear and bright, "I think Mother and Father made their wishes quite clear. Don't you agree, everyone?" A few people chuckled nervously. Most just stared at me with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. I was a car crash they couldn't look away from. "Fiona," Clarissa said, stepping toward me. The click of her heels on the hardwood floor sounded like gunshots. "I am sure this is a shock, but really, it is for your own good. You never really fit in here. Did you? You were always so domestic." She stopped a few feet away from me, looking down. "As the new owner of Titanium Estates and this property, I have some immediate changes to implement. The company apartment you are currently residing in? The one on 4th Street? I nodded, unable to speak. My throat felt like it was filled with broken glass. "I have a buyer interested in that building," she said casually, examining her manicured fingernails. "I need it vacated. You have 3 days. 3 days? I managed to whisper. "Clarissa, it's the middle of winter. I have nowhere to go. I put everything back into the community projects." "That sounds like a you problem, doesn't it?" She smiled, her eyes cold as ice. "Remember the letter, Fiona, a lesson in humility. If I help you, I would be disrespecting our parents' dying wish. I wouldn't want to dishonor their memory." She turned to the security guards who stood by the door. "Please escort my sister out. She has packing to do." The humiliation was a hot, burning liquid spreading through my veins. I stood up, my legs shaking. I didn't look at the shareholders. I didn't look at the lawyer. I looked at Clarissa, hoping to see a flicker of humanity, a trace of the sister I used to play hide and seek with in this very house. I saw nothing but a mirror reflecting her own vanity. "Wait," I said, my voice trembling but gaining a strange, quiet strength. "There is one thing. Grandma's box." Clarissa laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "That old junk? The one in the attic? By all means, take it. Consider it my personal inheritance to you. Trash for the trash." I walked out of the library, the whispers of the crowd following me like a swarm of angry bees. I climbed the stairs to the attic one last time. It was dusty and cold. The only place in the house my parents never renovated because they forgot it existed, in the corner, under a loose floorboard where I used to hide when my parents fought, sat the box. It was a simple thing, made of dark, polished walnut, scarred by time. It wasn't worth anything on the market. It had no jewels, no gold inlays. It was just a heavy wooden box that my grandmother, Margaret Hartwood, had given me when I was 7 years old. I picked it up. It was heavier than I remembered. I tucked it under my arm, shielding it with my coat. I walked back down the grand staircase, ignoring the reception that was now in full swing. Champagne corks were popping. I could hear Clarissa laughing, the sound distinct and piercing. They were celebrating. They were celebrating the transfer of power, and I was just the debris left in the wake. The heavy oak front doors groaned as I pushed them open. The cold hit me instantly. The wind had picked up, howling through the stone pillars of the entrance. Snow was falling harder now, thick white flakes that stung my cheeks. I walked down the long driveway, the snow crunching under my thin dress shoes. When I reached the iron gates, I stopped and turned back. The mansion glowed with golden light, warm and inviting. I could see the silhouettes of the guests moving past the windows, drinking wine that cost more than I would now make in a month. I stood there in the freezing darkness of Chicago. I had no home. I had $0 to my name. I had no job. My family had chewed me up and spit me out. Calling it a moral lesson, I looked down at the wooden box in my hands. The varnish was worn, and the brass latch was tarnished. It was small, old, and seemingly worthless. Just like me. "Just us now. Grandma." I whispered into the wind. I turned my collar up against the snow and began to walk toward the bus stop, clutching the box to my chest as if it were the last life raft in the middle of a freezing ocean. I did not know then that I was holding a weapon. I did not know that the empire glowing behind me was built on a lie, and that the truth was resting right there. In my frozen hands, all I knew was that I was cold, and the long night had only just begun. The apartment smelled of boiled cabbage and stale cigarette smoke, a scent that seemed to have seeped into the very drywall over the last 40 years. It was located in a crumbling brick building on the far edges of the South Side, miles away from the manicured lawns and heated driveways of the Gold Coast. The radiator clanked and hissed like a dying animal, struggling to fight off the Chicago winter that rattled the single-pane window. This was my new reality. $350 a month in rent, a leaking faucet, and a view of a dumpster that was currently overflowing with snow and trash. It had been 7 days since the funeral. 7 days since I was evicted from the life I had known for 32 years. I had packed my entire existence into 2 suitcases and a few cardboard boxes. The rest, the furniture, the art, the comfort, I had to leave behind. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, staring at the peeling beige paint on the opposite wall. Panic was a cold knot in my stomach that tightened every time I looked at my bank balance. I had less than $2,000 in checking. My parents had been thorough. They had not just cut me off, they had ensured I had no safety net. The lesson in humility was designed to be a crash course in destitution. I pulled myself together. I was a Hartwood. Even if my name had been stripped from the company letterhead, I had a degree in business management. I had 10 years of experience managing complex property portfolios. I knew the Chicago real estate market better than almost anyone. I put on my best suit, the one I had worn to board meetings, and I hit the pavement. I started with the firms that had always tried to poach me. I walked into the glass-walled lobby of Harrison Associates, a competitor that had sent me a fruit basket every Christmas for 5 years. The receptionist smiled when I gave my name, but the smile faltered when she checked her computer. "I am so sorry, Ms. Hartwood," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Mr. Harrison is unavailable, indefinitely." "I can wait," I said, projecting a confidence I did not feel. "I just need 5 minutes. He left a note," she said, sliding a piece of paper across the marble desk. I unfolded it. It wasn't a typed formal rejection. It was a handwritten scrawl on a yellow sticky note. "Clarissa called. Contracts at risk. Cannot hire. Sorry." I walked out, my cheeks burning. It happened again at Miller Urban Design, then again at the Stone Group. By the 4th rejection, the pattern was undeniable. Clarissa had not just fired me, she had blacklisted me. She was using the immense leverage of Titanium Estates to ensure that no one in the industry would touch me. If they hired me, they lost Titanium's business. It was a simple, brutal equation. In the world of high-stakes real estate, money always spoke louder than loyalty. And Clarissa controlled all the money. By the end of the 2nd week, my savings were bleeding out. I had to eat. I had to pay for the bus fare. I had to pay for the coin-operated laundry in the basement of my building. The realization hit me late one Tuesday afternoon as I sat on a park bench. Watching people rush home from jobs I was qualified to manage but wasn't allowed to have, I could not work in my field. I had to survive. I walked into a diner called the Rusty Spoon, located 3 blocks from my apartment. It was the kind of place with sticky vinyl booths and a menu that hadn't changed since 1985. A sign in the window read, "Help wanted, cash, no questions." The manager was a man named Earl, who looked like he had been fried in the same oil he used for the French fries. He looked at my manicured hands, then at my expensive wool coat, and laughed. "You ever carried a tray in your life, princess?" he asked, chewing on a toothpick. "No," I said, meeting his gaze evenly. "But I learn fast, and I don't quit." $6 an hour plus tips," Earl grunted. "Shift starts at 5 a.m. Don't be late." $6 an hour. I used to sign invoices for building repairs that cost $50,000 without blinking. Now, $6 was my lifeline. The work was grueling. My feet, used to sensible office heels and plush carpets, screamed in protest after 8 hours on the hard tile floor. I learned to balance 3 plates on one arm. I learned to smile when customers complained that the coffee was cold or the eggs were too runny. I learned that the lesson in humility my parents wanted for me tasted like burnt toast and cheap maple syrup. One particularly brutal night. I came home after a double shift. It was 2 a.m. My back ached, and my uniform smelled of grease and onions. I counted my tips on the wobbly kitchen table. $42. It was enough for groceries for a few days. I couldn't sleep. The adrenaline of the shift was still coursing through me. Warring with exhaustion, the silence of the apartment was heavy. Amplified by the occasional siren wailing in the distance, I felt a profound, crushing loneliness. I had no one to call. My friends from my old life had stopped texting when the news of the inheritance, or lack thereof, hit the gossip columns. I was radioactive. I looked over at the corner of the room where I had stacked my boxes. On top of the pile sat the wooden box, Grandma Margaret's box. I had been too angry, too hurt to open it since the funeral. It felt like a consolation prize I didn't want. But tonight, in the bleak solitude of my poverty, it called to me. It was the only piece of my history that hadn't rejected me. I pulled the box onto my lap. The wood was cool and smooth, polished by decades of handling. It was a simple thing. Really, walnut, with brass hinges. My grandmother, Margaret Hartwood, had been the matriarch of the family, a woman of steel and velvet. She had built the foundation of the family wealth long before my father turned it into an empire of glass and steel. She used to tell me that a house was only as strong as its foundation, a lesson my father seemed to interpret as, a house is only as good as its resale value. I unlatched the lid. Inside, there was no jewelry, no cash, no bonds. It was filled with what looked like junk to the untrained eye. There was a silver thimble, a dried blue hydrangea blossom, pressed flat and brittle, a photo of me at 5 years old, sitting on her lap in the garden, both of us laughing, and at the bottom, taking up most of the space, was a thick, leather-bound book. It was a diary. The leather was cracked and worn, the color of dried blood. It had a heavy brass lock on the side, governed by a 4-digit combination dial. I frowned. I had never seen this diary before. Grandma had died when I was 20, and my father had quickly cleared out her estate. How had this ended up in the box she gave me years before her death? I tried the obvious combinations first. The year of her birth, 1920. The lock didn't budge. The year she died, 2010. Nothing. My birthday. My father's birthday. The dial spun uselessly. I closed my eyes, trying to summon the sound of her voice. She used to tell me stories instead of reading fairy tales. She told me about the Great Depression, about the war, about starting her first business selling handmade linens when everyone told her a woman couldn't run a company. Never forget the start. Fiona, she would say, tapping my nose. Everyone remembers the victory, but the start is where the soul is. November 12th, 1948, that was the day I signed my first lease. It was a terrifying, beautiful day. November 12th, 11. 12. My fingers trembled as I turned the dials. 1, 1, 1, 2, click. The sound was loud in the quiet room. The brass clasp sprang open. My heart skipped a beat. She had locked this away. And the key was a memory she had shared only with me. Not Clarissa, not my father. Me. I opened the cover. The pages were yellowed, smelling of vanilla and old ink. The handwriting was elegant, sweeping cursive, unmistakably hers. The first few dozen pages were mundane. Recipes for apple pie, observations about the weather, notes about my father's grades in school. It felt invasive, yet comforting, like sitting in her kitchen again. But as I flipped toward the middle of the diary, the dates jumped forward. The handwriting became more jagged, more hurried. The ink changed from blue to black, as if she were pressing harder against the page. October 14th, 1985. Richard came to me today asking for more capital. Again, he speaks of expansion, of skyscrapers, of dominating the skyline, but I do not see passion in his eyes. I see hunger, a cold, bottomless hunger. He looks at the tenants not as people to be housed, but as numbers to be squeezed. I fear I have raised a wolf and invited him into the sheepfold. I felt a chill run down my spine. Richard was my father. She was writing about him with a fear I had never suspected. I turned the page. December 2nd, 1985. I have made a decision. I cannot let the legacy of compassion be swallowed by the beast of greed. Richard thinks the company is his birthright. He forgets that I am the one who built the walls he seeks to gild. I met with Arthur today. We have drafted the failsafe. Arthur. The name sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. I kept reading, my eyes scanning the pages frantically. January 5th, 1986. The original covenant is signed. It is done. I have hidden the existence of the Verity Trust from Richard. He believes he has full control, but he is merely a steward. If the day comes when he, or his chosen heir, loses their way, if they use the Heartwood name to crush the family rather than support it, the covenant will trigger. It is my insurance policy against my own blood. I stopped breathing. The Verity Trust? The original covenant? I had sat in board meetings for 10 years. I had reviewed every legal document, every asset, every liability of Titanium Estates. There was no mention of a Verity Trust. It didn't exist in the company records. I looked closer at the entry. Arthur has the original. I have kept the copy here, in the spine, just in case. In the spine? I turned the diary over in my hands. The leather spine was thick, reinforced with stitching. I ran my fingers along the inside of the binding, feeling for a lump, a seam, anything. There, near the bottom. The leather felt slightly raised. I grabbed a small paring knife from my kitchen counter, the only knife I owned now, and carefully picked at the stitching. The thread gave way with a soft popping sound. I slid my fingers into the gap between the leather and the binding. I felt something thin and crisp. I pulled it out. It was a folded piece of parchment, translucent and fragile. I unfolded it on the table, smoothing it out under the dim light of the single bulb hanging from the ceiling. It was not the full legal document. It was a summary, written in Grandma's hand, titled, Directives for the Verity Trust. My eyes raced across the lines. Clause 4. The Lesson of Humility. Should the primary beneficiary of the Hartwood estate utilize their power to disenfranchise, impoverish, or publicly humiliate a direct blood descendant of Margaret Hartwood, this action shall be deemed a violation of the moral clause. I gasped aloud. Lesson in humility. My parents had used those exact words in their letter to me. They thought they were being clever. They thought they were teaching me. But they had unknowingly quoted the very clause that could destroy them. I read on. Upon proof of such violation, the entirety of the Hartwood assets, including titanium estates and all subsidiary holdings, shall revert immediately to the control of the Verity Trust. The disenfranchised descendant shall be named the sole trustee and beneficiary, provided they can produce the key of truth and the seal of the original covenant. My hands were shaking so hard, I could barely hold the paper. This changed everything. My parents didn't leave me $0 because they hated me. Well, maybe they did. But that wasn't the point anymore. Their cruelty, their arrogance, their need to make a public spectacle of my failure. It was the trigger. Grandma Margaret had known. She had looked 40 years into the future and seen Clarissa standing over my grave, laughing. She had seen my father's coldness, and she had set a trap. But where was the original covenant? This piece of paper was just a summary, a handwritten note. It wouldn't stand up in court against Clarissa's army of lawyers. I needed the official documents. I needed the key of truth, whatever that was. And I needed Arthur. I looked back at the diary entry. Arthur has the original, Arthur P. Sterling. The name suddenly clicked. He was the family lawyer before Mr. Blackwood. He was the one who used to give me peppermint candies when I visited the office as a child. He had retired 20 years ago. Most people thought he was dead. I sat back in the rickety wooden chair. The cold of the apartment forgotten. The exhaustion from the diner vanished, replaced by a surge of electricity that started in my chest and spread to my fingertips. Clarissa thought she had won. She thought she had buried me in this frozen wasteland of a suburb. She thought I was just a waitress with a famous last name and empty pockets. I looked at the diary, then at the summary, and finally at the window where the first gray light of dawn was beginning to touch the dirty snow. You wanted to teach me a lesson, I whispered, my voice sounding raspy and dangerous in the empty room. You wanted me to learn what it means to start from nothing. Well, congratulations, Clarissa. You succeeded. I picked up the diary and locked it back into the box. I am starting from nothing, I said to the ghosts in the room, and I am going to take everything. I wasn't just Fiona the waitress anymore. I was Fiona the hunter. And for the first time since the funeral, I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a Hartwood who had finally found her teeth. The nights that followed my discovery of the hidden compartment were a blur of caffeine and ink. My apartment, once a symbol of my destitution, transformed into a war room. By day, I was the invisible waitress at the Rusty Spoon, wiping grease off tables and enduring the condescending stares of customers who tipped me in quarters. But by night, I was a forensic accountant dissecting the soul of my family. The Diary of Margaret Hartwood was not merely a memoir, it was a dossier. I spent hours cross-referencing the dates in the diary with public records I accessed on the library computer down the street. I had to be careful. I knew that internet searches could be tracked, and if Clarissa had blacklisted me, she likely had alerts set up for my name. So, I used cash to buy guest passes and wore a hoodie to cover my face, sitting in the back corner of the public library like a fugitive. What I found in those leather-bound pages dismantled everything I thought I knew about my father's success. The narrative sold to Forbes magazine and the Wall Street Journal was that Richard Hartwood was a self-made visionary who took a small family business and turned it into an empire. The diary told a different story. March 3, 1990. Richard believes he is a genius because the bank approved the loan for the Millennium Tower. He does not know that I secured the collateral using the Verity Trust. He thinks his charm won them over. It was my land. It is always my land. He builds castles in the sky, but he forgets who owns the ground beneath them. I sat back in the hard wooden chair of the library, the glow of the monitor stinging my tired eyes. Titanium Estates was a shell. The real assets, the prime land in downtown Chicago, the historic deeds, the mineral rights, were never technically transferred to Titanium. They were leased to the company by an entity called the Verity Trust. My father had spent his entire life acting as the landlord of Chicago, never realizing he was just a tenant of his own mother. But the most explosive revelation came on a Tuesday night. 3 weeks into my double life, I was back in my apartment, shivering under a thin blanket, reading an entry dated 2 years before my grandmother died. November 10th, 2008. I see the way Clarissa looks at the staff. She has the same sickness as Richard. The arrogance, the belief that people are disposable. I have updated the covenant today. The lesson in humility is no longer a suggestion. It is a trigger mechanism. I leaned in closer, my heart pounding against my ribs. If the acting CEO of Titanium Estates uses their power to publicly degrade a family member, to strip them of their dignity and resources in a manner that displays a lack of moral character, the lease agreement between Verity Trust and Titanium Estates becomes void. The assets do not transfer to the abuser. They revert to the victim. Provided the victim has maintained the values of the family. I read the paragraph 3 times, then I read it again. My parents had called their final act of cruelty a lesson in humility. They had written it in the will. They had Clarissa announce it to the world. They thought they were being poetic. They thought they were teaching me how to be tough. In reality, they had walked right into a trap set 20 years ago, by explicitly stating they were stripping me of everything to teach me a lesson, and by allowing Clarissa to publicly humiliate me at the funeral. They had fulfilled the exact conditions required to activate the Verity Trust. They hadn't disinherited me. They had unwittingly handed me the keys to the kingdom, but knowing the truth and proving it were 2 very different things. The diary was evidence of intent, but it wasn't the legal instrument. I needed the original deed of trust. I needed the original covenant that Grandma Margaret kept referring to. And according to the diary, there was only one man who held the physical copy of that document, Arthur P. Sterling. I traced the name in the diary with my finger. Arthur came for tea today. He is the only one who understands that law is not about loopholes, but about justice. He has promised to guard the covenant with his life. I needed to find him. I started my search the next morning at the library. I typed, Arthur P. Sterling Attorney Chicago into the search bar. The results were disheartening. The first hit was a simplified obituary notice from 5 years ago, but it was for an Arthur Sterling in Ohio. Wrong man. The second hit was a listing for the Sterling Associates law firm, which was marked as permanently closed. I dug deeper, scrolling through pages of archived legal journals. I found a profile on him from 1995. He was described as a legal eagle of the old school, a man who refused to upgrade to digital filing systems and wrote everything with a fountain pen. He had retired in 2015, dissolving his practice. After that, the trail went cold. There were rumors on legal forums that he had moved to Europe, or that he had died quietly in a nursing home. One comment on a thread about Chicago's lost lawyers simply said, "Sterling didn't retire, he vanished." Some say he knew too much about the old money families. If he was dead, the Verity Trust might be buried with him. If he was alive, he was hiding. And if he was hiding, he did not want to be found. While I was hunting for ghosts, the living were busy destroying the future. The television in the diner was always tuned to the local news channel. It was background noise, usually ignored, until I heard the familiar fanfare of a press conference. I looked up from the counter, a pot of coffee in my hand, and saw my sister's face filling the screen. She was wearing a white hard hat that looked ridiculous on her perfectly coiffed hair. She was standing in front of a demolition site, a site I recognized immediately. It was the old Kensington building, a beautiful brick structure that Grandma Margaret had bought with her first profits. It was a historic landmark, or at least, it was supposed to be. "We are entering a new era," Clarissa announced to the reporters, her smile dazzling and terrifying. "The old must make way for the new. I am proud to announce the groundbreaking of Skyline Dreams, a 70-story luxury condominium complex that will redefine the Chicago skyline." I nearly dropped the coffee pot. Skyline Dreams, I knew that project. My father had shelved it 5 years ago because the engineering reports deemed the soil unstable and the financial projections were suicidal. It required leveraging the company to the hilt. It was a vanity project that would bankrupt Titanium Estates if the market dipped even by 1%. Clarissa wasn't just building a tower. She was liquidating the company's safety net to do it. The ticker at the bottom of the screen scrolled the details. Titanium Estates sells Heartland portfolio to fund new construction. My blood ran cold. The Heartland portfolio was the core collection of affordable housing units that provided steady, reliable income. It was the backbone of the company. It was the legacy Grandma Margaret was proudest of. Clarissa was selling the family jewels to buy a rhinestone necklace. I realized with a jolt of panic that I was running out of time. If Clarissa sold off the assets that belonged to the Verity Trust before I could prove they belonged to the trust, the legal battle would take decades. The money would be gone. The buildings would be rubble. There would be nothing left to reclaim. I had to accelerate my search for Arthur Sterling. I went back to the diary that night, desperate for a clue I might have missed. I read the entries from the year he retired. Nothing. I read the entries about their tea times. Nothing. Then, I noticed something on the inside of the back cover. It was a small, faint pencil sketch. It looked like a doodle. It depicted a mountain with a distinct, jagged peak, and a small cabin nestled at the base. Underneath, in tiny letters, was written, "Green Mountain Sanctuary, for when the noise becomes too loud. Green Mountain, Vermont?" I went back to the library the next day. I searched for Green Mountain Sanctuary, Vermont. It was a high-end assisted living facility for retired professionals, located in a remote part of the state, famous for its privacy and isolation. It was the kind of place where wealthy people went to be forgotten. I felt a surge of hope. It was a long shot, a desperate guess, but it was all I had. I checked my bank account. I had enough for a one-way bus ticket to Burlington, Vermont, and maybe 2 nights in a cheap motel, if I went. And he wasn't there. I would be stranded. I would lose my job at the diner. I would truly have nothing. But looking at Clarissa on that screen, destroying everything my grandmother built, I knew I had no choice. The lesson in humility wasn't about accepting defeat. It was about knowing when to risk everything for what was right. I returned to my apartment to pack my bag. The decision was made. I would leave in the morning. As I reached for the doorknob of my apartment, I froze. There was a piece of paper slipped under my door. I lived in a building where the neighbors didn't talk to each other. We didn't leave notes. We barely made eye contact. I stepped back, my heart hammering against my ribs. I stared at the white rectangle on the dirty floorboards. It looked innocent, but it felt like a bomb. I knelt down and picked it up. It was a plain white envelope, sealed. No stamp, no return address, just my name, Fiona, printed in block letters. I tore it open. Inside was a single index card. The message was typed, not handwritten. Stop digging in the graveyard. Some secrets are buried for a reason. If you continue looking for A, the blacklist will be the least of your problems. Enjoy your life as a waitress. It is safer than the alternative. I dropped the card as if it were burning my skin. They knew. Clarissa, or someone working for her, knew I was looking for Arthur Sterling. They knew I was digging. They had been watching me. Maybe they had followed me to the library. Maybe they had hacked the old laptop I used. Fear, cold and sharp, washed over me. I looked at the flimsy lock on my apartment door. It offered no protection. If they could slide a note under my door, they could come in. But then, another emotion rose up to meet the fear. Anger. If they were threatening me, it meant I was right. It meant the diary was real. It meant Arthur Sterling was alive, and he had the proof that could destroy them. They were scared. The mighty Clarissa Hartwood, with her millions and her skyscrapers, was terrified of a waitress and an 80-year-old lawyer. I grabbed the card and ripped it into shreds. "You made a mistake," I said to the empty hallway, my voice trembling but firm. "You just confirmed he is alive." I didn't wait for morning. I grabbed my bag, shoved the wooden box and the diary deep inside it, and walked out the door. I wasn't going to wait for them to make good on their threat. I was going to Vermont. And I was going to bring the storm with me. I sat in the back of a Greyhound bus that smelled of diesel fumes and stale sandwiches, watching the gray landscape of the Midwest dissolve into the white. Rolling hills of the Northeast. The journey had taken 18 hours. My back ached, my legs were cramped, and my bank account was now dangerously close to zero. Before I boarded, I had made one last desperate investment. I wired $300, nearly half of what I had left, to a digital skip tracer I found on a private investigation forum. It was a terrifying gamble. The doodle in the diary said, "Green Mountain Sanctuary," but that could have been a wish, a plan that never happened, or a place that closed down 10 years ago. I needed confirmation before I stranded myself in Vermont. The report had pinged my phone somewhere near Cleveland. It was short and expensive. Subject: Arthur P. Sterling. Status: active resident. Location: Green Mountain Sanctuary, Stowe, Vermont. Notes: high security memory care unit. He was alive. When the bus finally hissed to a halt in Stowe, the air was cleaner but sharper than in Chicago. It bit at my exposed skin. I didn't have money for a taxi, so I walked the 2 miles to the address listed in the report. Green Mountain Sanctuary was not a nursing home. It was a fortress disguised as a ski lodge. It sat behind a 12-foot iron fence, surrounded by pine trees that looked like sentries. The main building was a sprawling structure of timber and stone, radiating warmth and exclusivity. It was the kind of place where guilty children paid $15,000 a month to forget their parents in luxury. I smoothed down my rumpled coat, ran a hand through my hair, and walked up to the guard booth at the gate. "Name?" the guard asked, not even looking up from his clipboard. "Fiona Hartwood," I said, trying to inject some of my old boardroom authority into my voice. "I am here to see Arthur Sterling." The guard ran a finger down a laminated list. He stopped, frowned, and looked up. "Sterling? He is in the secure wing, restricted access. Are you on the list?" "I am his niece," I lied. He picked up a phone. "I don't have a Hartwood on the approved visitor list. Let me call administration." "Wait," I said, panic rising. "It might be under my maiden name, or—" "No list, no entry," he said, his voice flat. "Policy. Turn around, ma'am." I retreated, my heart hammering against my ribs. I walked back down the road until I was out of his sight, then ducked into a cluster of trees. I watched the gate. Delivery trucks came and go. A florist van, a laundry service. I needed a Trojan horse. I walked back toward the town center and found a small pharmacy. I bought a cheap thermal lunch bag, a box of gauze, and a red marker. It cost me $12. In the bathroom of a gas station, I turned my black coat inside out. The lining was a generic gray polyester that looked vaguely utilitarian. I used the red marker to draw a crude but official-looking cross on the white thermal bag and wrote urgent, biological in block letters. It was a flimsy disguise, but confidence is often the best camouflage. I returned to the sanctuary, but this time I bypassed the main gate. I found a service entrance around the back where a food service truck was idling. The driver was busy unloading crates of vegetables. I waited until he hauled a stack of crates inside. Propping the door open with a rubber wedge, I slipped inside. The kitchen was chaotic, filled with the clatter of pans and shouting chefs. I kept my head down, clutching the thermal bag to my chest like it contained a human heart. I marched through the double doors into the main hallway, walking with the hurried purpose of someone who is late and important. "Hey, you!" a voice called out behind me. I froze. I turned around to see a nurse in blue scrubs frowning at me. "Deliveries go to the front desk," she said, pointing a finger. "I can't," I snapped, looking at my watch. "This is a rush order for the Sterling patient in room." I hesitated, praying the investigator's report was accurate. "Room 304. It is temperature-sensitive medication. If I leave it at the desk and it degrades, my supervisor said to tell you it is on your license. Not ours." The nurse blinked. The threat of liability was a universal language in healthcare. "Fine," she sighed, waving her hand. "Third floor, East Wing. Code for the elevator is 4922. "Thank you," I said, turning on my heel before my knees could give way. I found room 304 at the end of a long, carpeted corridor that smelled of lavender and antiseptic. The door was heavy oak. I knocked once, then pushed it open. The room was spacious, with a view of the snowy mountains that would cost a fortune at a hotel. In the corner, sitting in a wheelchair facing the window, was a man. Arthur Sterling was smaller than I imagined. He was wrapped in a thick wool blanket, his white hair wispy and thin. His head lolled slightly to the side. "Mr. Sterling?" I whispered, closing the door behind me and locking it. He didn't move. I walked around to face him. His eyes were milky and unfocused. Staring at a spot on the carpet, he was muttering something under his breath. A repetitive, nonsensical stream of words. "The sparrows," he mumbled. "The sparrows ate the crumbs. No crumbs left. No crumbs." My heart sank. This was the man who held the key to my future? He was gone. His mind had retreated into a fog where only sparrows and crumbs existed. "Mr. Sterling?" I said, kneeling beside his chair. "My name is Fiona. I am Margaret Hartwood's granddaughter." He blinked, drool pooling at the corner of his mouth. "Margaret likes tea, but the tea is cold, always cold." "Please," I said, fighting back tears of frustration. "I need your help. Clarissa, my sister. She has taken everything. The company, the house." "Bluebirds are prettier," he said, smiling vacantly at the window. "But they are liars." I stood up, pacing the room. It was over. I had traveled halfway across the country for a senile old man. I had risked arrest. I had wasted my last dollar. I looked at my bag. The wooden box was inside. The diary. I pulled out the diary. It was my last card to play. I walked back to him and placed the leather book on his lap. His hands, gnarled with arthritis, twitched. "Mr. Sterling?" I said, leaning close to his ear. I remembered the password from the diary, the name of the trust. Verity. The effect was instantaneous and terrifying. His head snapped up. The milky haze in his eyes seemed to clear, replaced by a razor-sharp focus that pinned me to the spot. The vacant smile vanished. His posture straightened. He looked down at the diary on his lap. His hand moved, no longer trembling, and caressed the worn leather cover. "Verity," he repeated. His voice was not the rasp of a senile man. It was a deep, resonant baritone, the voice of a man who had commanded courtrooms for 40 years. "Truth?" He looked up at me. "You have her eyes, Margaret's eyes." "Mr. Sterling?" I asked, stunned. You're not..." "Senile?" He let out a dry chuckle. It is the only way to get a decent nap in this place without nurses bothering you every 10 minutes. Plus, nobody tells secrets around a sharp lawyer, but everyone talks in front of a crazy old man. I know more about the staff's affairs than they do." He wheeled his chair back from the window and gestured to the chair opposite him. "Sit down, Fiona. I have been waiting for you for 20 years. I sat, my legs weak. "You knew I would come?" "Margaret knew," he said. "She told me that if the wolf ever got into the hen house, the lamb would eventually find its way to the shepherd." "Clarissa is destroying the company," I said, the words tumbling out. "She is selling the assets. She is building a monstrosity called Skyline Dreams. I found the diary. I found the note about the covenant. But I need the proof." Arthur nodded slowly. "The covenant, yes. The document that proves Titanium Estates is a lie." "Where is it?" I asked. "Is it here?" "Here?" Arthur scoffed. "Do you think I would keep a document worth billions of dollars in a room where the janitor steals my socks? No, my dear. The original covenant, along with the deeds to the land, is in a safety deposit box at the Zürcher Kantonalbank in Zurich, Switzerland." "Switzerland?" I slumped in my chair. "I can't get to Switzerland. I don't even have enough money for a bus ticket back to Chicago." "You don't need money yet," Arthur said. "You need authority. Access to that box requires two things: my biometric signature, which I can provide via a proxy authorization I set up years ago, and the key." "The key," I repeated. "The diary said you had the key." Arthur shook his head. "No, read the diary again. Margaret didn't trust me with both pieces of the puzzle. She was a wise woman. She separated them. I hold the location and the legal authority. The heir holds the physical token." "But I don't have a key," I said, desperation rising again. "I checked the box. I checked the diary. I found the note in the spine. But that was it." "You looked," Arthur said, his eyes twinkling. "But you did not see. Margaret loved puzzles. She believed that things of value should be hidden in plain sight, protected by their own mundane appearance." He pointed a bony finger at the diary on his lap. "The back cover, not the spine, the cover itself." I picked up the diary. The back cover was thick, rigid cardboard covered in leather. It felt solid. "It is too thick," Arthur murmured. "About 3 millimeters too thick for a standard binding." I ran my thumbs along the edge of the leather. At the bottom right corner, there was a tiny, almost invisible indentation. It looked like a scuff mark. "Press it," Arthur commanded. "Hard." I pressed my thumbnail into the indentation. There was a soft snap, like a magnet disengaging. The leather flap on the inside of the back cover loosened. I peeled it back, embedded into the cardboard. Perfectly flush with the surface so it wouldn't create a lump, was a key. It wasn't a standard house key. It was a flat, silver card made of metal, perforated with a complex pattern of holes, like an old computer punch card, but smaller. It was cold to the touch. "The Zurich key," Arthur whispered. "It fits a mechanism that hasn't been manufactured since 1980. With that key, and my affidavit, you are the CEO of the Verity Trust. You own the ground your sister walks on." I stared at the silver card in my hand. It was so light, yet it carried the weight of an empire. "We need to move," Arthur said, his voice urgent. "If you find me, they can find me. Does anyone know you are here?" "I don't think so," I said. "I got a threat, a note under my door. They told me to stop looking. That's why I came." Arthur's face darkened. "If they threatened you, they are already tracking you. How did you pay for the bus?" "Cash?" "Yes, but—" I hesitated. "I paid for the investigator online. With my bank account." Arthur slammed his hand on the armrest of his wheelchair. "Foolish. They have alerts on your financial activity. They know you paid a skip tracer. They know where he looked." Suddenly, the fire alarm in the hallway began to blare, a harsh, rhythmic shriek that made us both jump. "Code red!" a voice shouted over the intercom. "Fire in the east wing!" A diversion, Arthur said grimly. They are here. Meanwhile, 1,000 miles away in Chicago, Clarissa Hartwood stood in her office, looking out at the city she thought she owned. Her phone buzzed on the glass desk. She picked it up. A man's voice, distorted and low, spoke. We tracked the purchase. She is in Vermont, the Green Mountain facility. Clarissa smiled. It was a cold, empty expression. She picked up a heavy crystal paperweight and turned it over in her hand. She is persistent, Clarissa said. I will give her that, but persistence is only a virtue if you survive. Orders? The voice asked. Recover the item, Clarissa said, looking at the empty spot on her bookshelf where the wooden box used to be. The old man is irrelevant. He is just a ghost. But Fiona has something that belongs to the company. Get it back, and make sure she doesn't come back to Chicago to tell anyone about it. And if she resists? Clarissa set the paperweight down with a sharp clack. Then teach her the final lesson, she said. Accidents happen in the mountains all the time. It is very slippery in the winter. She hung up the phone and turned back to the window. Goodbye, little sister, she whispered, back in Vermont. Arthur grabbed my wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong. The fire escape, he ordered. Behind the curtain. Go, now. I'm not leaving you, I shouted over the alarm. I am an 85-year-old man in a wheelchair, Arthur yelled back. I am a distraction. You are the target. If they catch you with that key, the game is over. Run, Fiona. Run and finish what Margaret started. Someone was pounding on the door. It wasn't the rhythmic knock of a nurse. It was the heavy, violent thud of a shoulder ramming against wood. I looked at Arthur, then at the key in my hand. I shoved the key into my bra, grabbed the diary, and threw open the window. The cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of snow and danger. Go! Arthur roared, spinning his wheelchair to face the door, blocking the entrance with his own frail body. I climbed out onto the metal fire escape just as the door splintered open. I saw two men in dark suits burst into the room. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I scrambled down the icy metal stairs, slipping and sliding, plunging into the deep snow of the Vermont woods, running for my life while I was running through the frozen woods of Vermont, fleeing from men in dark suits. My sister was busy toasting to her own magnificence in a penthouse overlooking the Chicago River. Clarissa Hartwood did not just inherit a company, she colonized it. The headquarters of Titanium Estates had undergone a radical transformation in the 3 weeks since our parents died. The dark oak paneling and subdued lighting that my father favored were gone, replaced by blinding white marble, chrome accents, and abstract art that looked like violence on canvas. It was sterile, expensive, and utterly soulless. She threw a party on a Tuesday night to celebrate the restructuring of the firm. Waiters in white tuxedos circulated with trays of caviar and vintage champagne that cost $400 a bottle. The air smelled of expensive perfume and fear. The guests were a mix of nervous board members and the new entourage of sycophants Clarissa had hired. Branding consultants, image architects, and social media strategists. In the middle of the room, Clarissa held court. She wore a dress made of red silk that looked like a fresh wound against the white room. She was laughing, her head thrown back, a glass of champagne tilting dangerously in her hand. To the future, she announced, raising her glass, and to trimming the fat. The fat she referred to was the human cost of her ambition. Earlier that morning, she had fired 40% of the workforce. These were not faceless drones. These were people like Mrs. Gable, the receptionist who had worked there for 30 years and knew every tenant's birthday. These were the maintenance crews who went out in blizzards to fix heaters. Clarissa had fired them via a mass email blast at 9 o'clock in the morning, citing efficiency redundancies. She didn't care that they had mortgages. She didn't care that they had children. She cared that their salaries, when combined, equaled the monthly interest payment on the loans she had taken out to fund Skyline Dreams. The project was her obsession. It was supposed to be a 70-story monument to her ego, a glittering needle of glass that would pierce the clouds. But behind the glossy renderings and the press releases, the project was a disaster. In the corner of the party, ignoring the champagne, stood George Miller. He was the head of construction, a man with hands like shovels and a face weathered by 50 years of Chicago winters. He looked ill. He clutched a tablet to his chest, his knuckles white. He approached Clarissa during a lull in the conversation. "Ms. Hartwood," Miller said, his voice low, "we need to talk about the caissons. The report from the structural engineers came back this afternoon." Clarissa's smile didn't waver, but her eyes went cold. "Not now, George. We are celebrating. We can't pour the concrete." "Clarissa," Miller insisted, dropping the honorifics in his desperation. "The soil composition is too sandy. The pilings aren't hitting bedrock. If we build 70 stories on this muck, the torque from the wind load will crack the foundation within 5 years. Maybe sooner." Clarissa took a sip of her champagne. She stepped closer to him, invading his personal space. "Do you know how much delay costs me, George?" she whispered. "It costs me $200,000 a day in interest. I don't care about the sand. I don't care about the wind. I care about the timeline. Inject the soil with chemical stabilizers and pour the damn concrete." "That is a temporary fix," Miller argued. "It violates city code. It violates basic safety standards. If the inspector sees—" "The inspector has already been taken care of," Clarissa interrupted, her voice turning to ice. "And if you can't get it done, George, I will find someone who can. Perhaps you want to join Mrs. Gable in retirement?" Miller paled. He had a wife in a nursing home. He needed the insurance. He swallowed his integrity, nodded once, and walked away. Clarissa watched him go, then turned back to her guests, her smile beaming brighter than before. "Minor technicalities," she chirped. "Construction is so messy, isn't it?" The next morning, while I was sitting on a Greyhound bus heading back to Chicago under a fake name, Clarissa appeared on a national morning talk show. I watched it on the cracked screen of a passenger's phone 2 rows ahead of me. The host, a woman with perfect teeth and a sympathetic tilt to her head, leaned in. "Clarissa, there have been rumors about your sister, Fiona. People are saying she was cut out of the will completely. That seems harsh." Clarissa sighed, a tragic, practiced sound. She looked directly into the camera, her eyes shimmering with fake tears. "It breaks my heart," Clarissa said. "Truly. We tried to help Fiona. My parents tried. But she has always been troubled. She refused to work. She refused to take responsibility. She viewed the family fortune as a personal piggy bank. Leaving her nothing was the hardest thing my parents ever had to do. But it was an act of love. We are hoping that hitting rock bottom will finally force her to stand on her own 2 feet. Until then, I have to protect the company and the hundreds of families who depend on it from her instability." The audience applauded. They applauded her bravery. I sat in the back of the bus, wearing a thrift store hoodie, my hands clenched so tight my fingernails cut into my palms. Troubled, refused to work, instability, every word was a projection. She was describing herself and painting it onto me. She was stealing my reputation just as she had stolen my inheritance, but this time, the anger didn't paralyze me. It focused me. I arrived in Chicago under the cover of darkness. I didn't go to my apartment. I knew they would be watching it. I went to a cheap motel near the airport, paid cash, and used a burner phone I had bought at a gas station to make one call. "Mr. Miller," I said when he answered. "It's Fiona." There was a long silence on the other end. Then, a ragged exhale. "Fiona, my God, they said you disappeared. They said you were on drugs." "I'm not on drugs. George, I'm on a mission, and I know about the soil." We met an hour later at a diner in the industrial district, a place where the waitress poured coffee without making eye contact, and the jukebox was broken. Miller looked 10 years older than when I had last seen him at the funeral. He was shaking. "She is going to kill people. Fiona," Miller whispered, staring into his black coffee. "She is rushing the foundation. She is using substandard steel from a supplier that gave her a kickback. I tried to stop it. I tried. I know, George, I said, reaching across the table to touch his hand. But I can stop her. I have a way. But I need proof. I need the soil reports she ignored. I need the emails where she ordered you to bypass the safety codes. Miller shook his head frantically. I can't. They locked me out of the server. She fired the IT director and brought in her own people. All the physical files are in the site office at the construction yard. It is a fortress. Private security. Cameras. Is the hard copy of the soil report in the trailer? I asked. Yes, Miller said. In the red binder on the project manager's desk, along with the memo she signed authorizing the chemical stabilizers. That signature is the smoking gun. It proves she knew the risk and proceeded anyway. Give me the access code to the gate, I said. Fiona, you can't, he pleaded. If they catch you. If we don't do this, that building falls down, I said grimly. And she walks away with millions while innocent people get buried. Give me the code. He wrote it on a napkin, 2580. I waited until 3 o'clock in the morning. The construction site for Skyline Dreams was a gaping wound in the earth. Surrounded by chain-link fences and floodlights, the skeleton of the first few floors rose up like charred ribs against the night sky. I wore black jeans and a black jacket. I pulled my hair back and slipped through the shadows of the alleyway that bordered the site. The security guard was sitting in the booth at the front entrance, watching a movie on his tablet. I could see the blue glow reflecting on his face. I moved to the side gate, the one used for deliveries. I punched in the code Miller had given me, 2580. The keypad beeped green. The lock clicked. I slipped inside, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The site was eerie. Huge cranes loomed overhead like sleeping dinosaurs. The wind whistled through the steel beams, making a mournful, hollow sound. The site office was a double-wide trailer sitting on concrete blocks near the center of the pit. I kept low, moving behind stacks of rebar and pallets of cement. I reached the trailer and tried the door. Locked. I went to the window. It was a cheap aluminum slider. I took out a flathead screwdriver I had bought earlier and jammed it into the frame. With a sharp grunt of effort, I leveraged it up. The latch popped with a sound that seemed deafening in the silence. I waited. No shouting, no running footsteps. I slid the window open and climbed inside. The office smelled of stale coffee and dust. I clicked on a small pen light. Keeping the beam low, there were desks cluttered with blueprints and hard hats. I found the project manager's desk. It was a mess of papers. I scanned the surface. Blueprints, invoices, takeout menus, no red binder. Panic flared in my chest. Had Miller lied? Had Clarissa moved it? I started opening drawers. The top drawer held pens and staples. The middle drawer held personal items. The bottom drawer was locked. I jammed the screwdriver into the lock of the file cabinet and twisted. The metal groaned and gave way. There it was, a thick red binder labeled Geotechnical Reports, Confidential. I grabbed it and flipped it open. My eyes scanned the pages under the pen light. Warning. Soil liquefaction risk high. Recommendation. Halt construction. And there, on the final page, was a memo. Authorized to proceed despite recommendations. Signed in bold. Sweeping blue ink. Clarissa Hartwood. I pulled out my burner phone and started snapping photos of every page. Click, click, click. My hands were shaking, but the images were clear. This was it. This was the proof of moral turpitude. She wasn't just a bad businesswoman. She was criminally negligent. She was willing to risk lives for vanity. Suddenly, a beam of light swept across the window I had entered. I thought I heard something over here, a voice shouted from outside. I froze. Security. Check the trailer, another voice commanded. I shoved the binder into my jacket and zipped it up. There was no time to climb back out the window. They were already at the door. I looked around frantically. There was a back door, probably leading to the bathroom or a storage closet. I scrambled toward it just as the front door handle turned. I threw myself into the small bathroom and locked the flimsy door. I stood in the dark, pressing my hand over my mouth to silence my breathing. "Window is open," the guard said. "Someone broke in." "Check the files," the second guard said. I heard drawers being yanked open. "The boss's drawer is busted," the guard said. "Red binder is gone." "Damn it. Call the supervisor. Lock down the perimeter. Nobody gets out." I was trapped. I looked up. The bathroom had a small ventilation square in the ceiling. It was tiny, maybe 12 inches by 12 inches. I stepped onto the toilet seat and pushed the grate. It was loose. I shoved the grate aside and pulled myself up. It was a tight squeeze. The metal edges scraped my skin, tearing my jacket, but I wiggled my hips through, hauling myself into the crawl space between the trailer roof and the ceiling tiles. I lay there in the dust, listening to the guards storming around beneath me. "Check the bathroom." The doorknob rattled violently, then a kick. The door flew open. "Empty," the guard said. "They must have gone out the window before we got in," the other said. "Fan out. Search the yard." I waited until their footsteps faded into the distance. My heart was beating so hard I thought it would vibrate the ceiling tiles loose. I had the proof. I had the key. I had the diary. As I lay in the freezing crawl space of a construction trailer, smelling of fiberglass and fear, a realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. My parents had written that letter to teach me humility. They wanted me to learn that I was nothing without their money, but lying there, clutching the evidence that would bring down their golden child, I realized the truth. Clarissa, with all her millions, was the one who had failed. She had no loyalty, no morals, no spine. She was a hollow shell held up by money and lies. I, the failure, was the one risking my life to save the workers she considered disposable. I was the one fighting for the legacy of the name. You wanted a lesson in humility. Mother? Father? I thought, tears stinging my eyes in the darkness. You are getting one, but it isn't for me. It is for you. I waited another hour until the site was quiet again. Then I slipped out, a shadow in the night, carrying the dynamite that would blow their world apart. We set up our command center in a short-term rental apartment in the Loop, a nondescript unit with gray walls and furniture that looked like it had been bought in bulk. It was sterile, quiet, and perfectly invisible. It was only 3 blocks away from the Titanium Estates headquarters, close enough that I could see the logo glowing in the night sky from the living room window. Arthur Sterling sat at the small dining table, his wheelchair pushed aside. He looked frail, his skin like parchment paper stretched over brittle bone, but his eyes were burning with a terrifying vitality. The journey from Vermont had been hard on him. Yet the prospect of legal warfare seemed to act as a more potent medicine than anything the doctors at Green Mountain could prescribe. He was in his element. He was not the confused old man I had met in the nursing home. He was the shark who had swum in these waters for 50 years. "We do not attack yet," Arthur said, his voice raspy but firm. He was reviewing the photos I had taken of the soil reports, tapping his fountain pen against the table. "If we file the suit now, she will bury us in procedural delays. She will claim the documents are forged. She will claim you stole them. She has the money to drag this out for 10 years. We do not have 10 years. I do not have 10 years. So what do we do?" I asked, pacing the small room. "She is pouring concrete into unstable ground right now. She was floating on high-interest loans and vendor credit. She needed cash, massive amounts of it, to keep the construction crews from walking off the job before the 50th anniversary gala. We created a ghost, using a registered agent in Delaware and a series of encrypted servers. We established a shell company called Vanguard Horizon Capital. We built a website that looked sleek and professional, populated with stock photos of skyscrapers and vague mission statements about empowering visionary architecture to the casual observer. It looked like a boutique private equity firm specializing in distressed assets. Arthur drafted the offer letter. It was a masterpiece of corporate seduction. Vanguard Horizon Capital was offering a bridge loan of $50 million to Titanium Estates, to expedite the completion of the Skyline Dreams project. The terms were aggressive, but not predatory. It looked like a standard high-risk investment. "Send it," Arthur said. 2 days after we arrived in Chicago, I sat at the laptop, my finger hovering over the center key. I was sending an email to the sister who had left me penniless, offering her a fortune that didn't exist, to trap her in a lie she couldn't escape. I pressed send. "Now," Arthur said, leaning back and closing his eyes. "We wait. If she is as underwater as I think she is, she will reply within the hour." She replied in 12 minutes. The email from Clarissa's executive assistant was polite, breathless, and urgent. Ms. Hartwood was intrigued by our proposal and wanted to move to the due diligence phase immediately. She requested the funds be available within 48 hours. 48 hours, I said, reading the screen. "She is panicking. She must have a payroll deadline coming up." "Good," Arthur said. "Now, send the pre-funding disclosure agreement. This is the trap." The document Arthur had prepared looked standard. It was 20 pages of dense legal jargon regarding interest rates, repayment schedules, and default clauses, but buried on page 14, in paragraph 7, section B, was the kill shot. It was a clause titled, "Verification of solvency and reserve integrity." To receive the loan, the borrower, Clarissa, had to attest under penalty of perjury and fraud that the company's mandatory emergency reserve funds, as stipulated by the original corporate charter, were intact and unencumbered. It was a binary trap. If Clarissa told the truth, that she had drained the reserves to pay for the land, Vanguard Horizon would withdraw the offer, and she would go bankrupt. If she lied and signed the document claiming the reserves were full, she would be committing wire fraud. More importantly, she would be providing us with a signed, notarized admission that she was managing the finances in accordance with the charter, while we held the bank statements proving she wasn't. It was irrefutable proof of moral turpitude and fiduciary breach, the two specific keys required to unlock the Verity Trust. "She won't sign it," I said, looking at the clause. "Her lawyers will flag it." "She fired her good lawyers," Arthur reminded me. "She fired the old guard. She has a team of 20-something associates who are terrified of her. She will scream at them to get the deal done, and they will skim right past page 14. We sent the document. The next 6 hours were the longest of my life. I paced the apartment until I wore a path in the cheap carpet. I drank 4 cups of coffee. Arthur sat perfectly still, like a statue of judgment. Watching the snow fall outside the window, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the notification pinged on the laptop. Document signed, C. Hartwood. I froze. I clicked open the file. There it was. Her signature, bold, sweeping, arrogant. And right above it, the checked box next to the clause verifying that the reserve funds were intact. She had done it. She had lied to secure a loan from a company that didn't exist, signing her name to a fraudulent statement. "Got her," I whispered, the breath leaving my lungs in a rush. Arthur opened his eyes. He didn't smile. He just nodded, a solemn motion. "She has sealed her fate. Now, we prepare the execution." For the next 2 days, we worked in a frenzy. Arthur dictated, and I typed. We prepared the petition to the High Court to enact the Verity Trust protocols. We organized the evidence, the diary, the soil reports, the blackmail note, the affidavit from Arthur, and now, the fraudulent loan application. We were building a guillotine made of paper, but legal victory wasn't enough. The diary said the lesson in humility had to be public. My parents had humiliated me before 300 guests. The correction had to be just as visible. The 50th anniversary of Titanium Estates was scheduled for Friday night. It was going to be the social event of the season. Held at the Grand Ballroom of the Palmer House Hotel, every major investor, politician, and media figure in Chicago would be there. I picked up the burner phone. I dialed the number for the investigative desk of the Chicago Tribune. I asked for a reporter named Sarah Jenkins, a woman known for her bulldog tenacity and her dislike of corporate corruption. "This is Fiona Hartwood," I said when she answered. There was a pause on the line. "The missing heiress? Everyone is looking for you. Your sister says you are in rehab." "My sister says a lot of things," I said calmly. "I am not in rehab. I am in Chicago. And I have a story for you. A story about a crumbling skyscraper, a fake will, and a fraud that is going to shake this city to its foundation." "I'm listening," Sarah said, her voice shifting from skeptical to hungry. "I can't give you the details over the phone," I said. "But if you want the scoop of the decade, be at the Palmer House on Friday night. Get a camera crew inside the ballroom. Do not let them stop you." "Fiona," she asked, "are you safe? Clarissa has a lot of pull." "I am safer than she is," I replied. "Just be there." I hung up and destroyed the SIM card. On the afternoon of the gala, I stood in front of the full-length mirror in the rental apartment. I had spent the last of my money on a suit. It was white, stark, blinding white. It was a sharp contrast to the black dress I had worn to the funeral. It looked like armor. I brushed my hair back, revealing my face. I looked different than the woman who had walked out of the manor 3 weeks ago. My cheekbones were sharper. My eyes were harder. The softness that my parents had despised was gone, burned away by the cold wind of reality. Arthur wheeled himself out of the bedroom. He was wearing his old tuxedo, which hung loosely on his frame, but he had polished his shoes until they shone like mirrors. On his lap sat the wooden box. "Are you ready?" he asked. "I am terrified," I admitted. "Good," Arthur said. "Fear keeps you sharp. Arrogance makes you sloppy. Clarissa is not afraid, and that is why she will lose." We took a taxi to the financial district. I asked the driver to stop 1 block away from the Titanium Estates headquarters. The building soared up into the night, a monolith of glass and steel. It looked impenetrable. Lights blazed on every floor, a testament to the power and wealth of the Hartwood name. From the street, you couldn't see the cracks in the foundation. You couldn't see the rot. I stood on the sidewalk, the wind whipping the legs of my white trousers. I looked up at the penthouse floor, where I knew Clarissa was likely getting dressed, perhaps admiring herself in the mirror, thinking she had won. She had the money. She had the company. She had the power, but she didn't have the truth. I reached into my pocket and touched the cold metal of the key Arthur had given me. "You wanted to teach me about humility, Clarissa?" I whispered to the uncaring stone of the building. "You wanted to show me my place? Tonight, I am going to teach you about the truth. And the truth is, you never owned any of this. You were just holding it for me." I turned back to the taxi where Arthur was waiting. "Let's go," I said, sliding into the seat. "We have a party to crash." The grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hotel was a cathedral of gold leaf and crystal, a place where Chicago's elite came to worship their own reflection. It was the kind of room that smelled of money, a specific cocktail of expensive perfume, aged scotch, and the metallic tang of chilled caviar. Tonight, however, beneath the scent of luxury, I could smell something else. I could smell the rot. It was the 50th anniversary gala of Titanium Estates. 50 years since my grandmother, Margaret Hartwood, signed her first deed. 50 years of building a reputation that my sister, Clarissa, had dismantled in less than a month. I stood outside the heavy mahogany doors of the ballroom, my hand resting on the handle of Arthur Sterling's wheelchair. I could hear the muffled sound of applause from inside. It was a polite, rhythmic sound, the sound of people who were paid to be impressed. Arthur looked up at me. In the dim light of the corridor, his face was pale, the skin translucent like onion paper. The journey from the safe house had exhausted him, and his breathing was shallow. But his eyes, those sharp, intelligent eyes that had stared down union bosses and hostile takeover artists in the 1980s, were burning with a fierce, cold light. He adjusted his bow tie with a trembling hand. "Do not let them see you shiver, Fiona," he whispered. his voice dry but commanding. "You are not the victim tonight. You are the reckoning." I smoothed the lapel of my white suit. It was a stark departure from the black morning dress I had worn the last time these people saw me. It was tailored, sharp, and blindingly bright. It was a statement. I wasn't here to mourn the past. I was here to cleanse it. "I am ready," I said. I signaled to the 2 hotel staff members standing by the doors. They looked hesitant, sensing that we were not on the guest list, but the sheer audacity of our presence made them pause. I nodded, and they pulled the handles. The doors swung open. The noise of the party washed over us like a physical wave. Inside, 500 people were gathered under the massive chandeliers. The room was a sea of black tuxedos and shimmering evening gowns. Waiters moved through the crowd like synchronized swimmers, carrying silver trays of champagne. At the far end of the room, on a raised stage bathed in a spotlight, stood Clarissa. She looked magnificent. I had to admit, she was wearing a gown of liquid silver that clung to her body, shimmering with every movement. She held a microphone in one hand and a glass of champagne in the other. Behind her, a massive screen displayed a black and white photo of our parents, Richard and Eleanor, looking benevolent and wise. It was a shrine to a lie. "And so," Clarissa's voice rang out, amplified and crystal clear, "we do not just build buildings, we build legacies. My parents taught me that the foundation of any skyscraper is not concrete or steel. It is integrity. It is the unshakable commitment to doing what is right, even when it is hard. That is the spirit of Titanium Estates. That is the spirit of Skyline Dreams." The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. Integrity. She was preaching about integrity while her signature was drying on a fraudulent loan document, and her construction crews were pouring cement into a liquefaction zone. I pushed the wheelchair forward. We took 3 steps onto the plush red carpet before the first head turned. It was a woman in a green dress, the wife of a bank president. She saw me, and her glass paused halfway to her lips. Then her husband turned, then the couple next to them. A ripple of silence began to spread through the room, moving outward from the doors like a shockwave. The chatter died down. The clinking of silverware stopped. The silence moved faster than we did. Racing toward the stage, within 30 seconds, the entire ballroom was quiet, save for the hum of the air conditioning and the rhythmic squeak of Arthur's wheelchair tires on the parquet floor. A wall of security guards materialized in front of us. 3 men, broad-shouldered and wearing earpieces, stepped into our path, blocking the center aisle. "Ma'am, sir," the lead guard said, his voice low but menacing. "This is a private event. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The crowd watched, breathless. This was the drama they thrived on, the outcast sister returning to crash the coronation. I didn't stop walking until the front wheels of the wheelchair were inches from the guard's shined shoes. I looked him in the eye. "Move." "I can't do that, ma'am," he said, reaching out to grab my arm. "Do not touch her," Arthur snapped. The authority in his voice was startling. Cracking like a whip, the guard hesitated, looking down at the frail old man. "Sir, you are trespassing." Arthur reached into the breast pocket of his tuxedo. His hand shook, but his movement was deliberate. He pulled out a small, heavy object. It wasn't a paper ticket. It was a rectangular slab of solid titanium, etched with gold lettering. He held it up. The light from the chandeliers caught the metal, making it gleam. "Do you know what this is, young man?" Arthur asked, his voice projecting surprisingly well in the quiet room. The guard squinted at it. "This," Arthur declared, "is a Life Founder member card. Issued in 1975, it grants the bearer unrestricted access to any property, event, or meeting associated with Titanium Estates. In perpetuity, it cannot be revoked by anyone other than the original board of directors, all of whom are dead except for me." Arthur leaned forward, his eyes locking onto the guards. "So unless you have a séance arranged, you are legally obligated to step aside if you touch this chair again. I will have your badge and your pension by tomorrow morning." The guard looked at the card, then up at the stage where Clarissa was freezing in the spotlight. He was confused. He had orders to keep me out, but the weight of corporate history in Arthur's hand was terrifying. He stepped back. The path cleared. I pushed Arthur forward. We moved down the center aisle, the crowd parting for us like the Red Sea. I felt their eyes on me. I saw the whispers behind hands. Is that Fiona? She looks different. Who is the old man? I thought she was destitute. Look at that suit. That is not a suit bought at a thrift store. I kept my head high, my gaze fixed on the stage. I didn't look left or right. I walked with the rhythm of a soldier marching into battle. Every step was a reclamation of the dignity they had tried to steal from me. Clarissa watched us come, from a distance. Her smile stayed fixed, painted on like a doll's. But as we got closer, I saw the panic in her eyes. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the podium. She looked at her security team, signaling them with her eyes to do something, but they were paralyzed by the spectacle. She had to make a choice. She could scream and have us dragged out, creating a scene that would ruin the gala and spook the investors, or she could play the benevolent sister and try to control the narrative. She chose the latter. It was her fatal flaw. She always believed she could talk her way out of anything. "Well," Clarissa said into the microphone, her voice forced into a bright, welcoming tone that sounded shrill. "It seems we have a surprise. My sister, Fiona, has decided to join us after all, and she brought a guest." There was a scattering of nervous laughter from the audience. "Fiona," Clarissa continued, "we are in the middle of a presentation. Perhaps you and your friend could find a seat at the back? We can catch up later. In private." We reached the base of the stage. I locked the brakes on Arthur's wheelchair. I stood beside him, looking up at her. The height difference was meant to make her look powerful, but from where I stood, she looked isolated. Arthur cleared his throat. It was a deep, gravelly sound that echoed in the silence. "I am afraid the back of the room will not suit us." "Clarissa," Arthur said. He didn't have a microphone, but the acoustics of the room carried his voice to the front rows. Clarissa gripped the podium tighter. "Mr. Sterling, I heard you were unwell, in a facility." "I am old, Clarissa, not dead," Arthur replied sharply. "And as the last surviving member of the original council that drafted the corporate charter of this company, I am invoking the privilege of the toast." A murmur went through the older members of the audience. They remembered. The privilege of the toast was an old tradition from my grandmother's time, where a founder could interrupt any proceeding to speak on the state of the company. It hadn't been used in 20 years. "The toast?" Clarissa laughed. A brittle sound. "Mr. Sterling, that is a charming tradition, but we have a schedule. The orchestra is waiting." "The orchestra can wait 5 minutes," Arthur said. He held out his hand. "The microphone, if you please." Clarissa hesitated. This was the moment. If she refused, she looked like a tyrant disrespecting a dying elder in front of her biggest investors. It would look weak. It would look fearful. But if she gave him the microphone, she lost control. I saw the calculation behind her eyes. She looked at Arthur, a frail man in a wheelchair. What could he possibly do? Ramble about the old days? Bore the audience? She decided he was harmless. She decided she could indulge him, look magnanimous, and then usher him off stage. "Very well," Clarissa said, her smile tight. "For old time's sake, come on up." There was no ramp to the stage, only stairs. Clarissa smirked, thinking this would stop us. "Help me up, Fiona," Arthur commanded. I didn't hesitate. I signaled to 2 waiters standing nearby. "Lift the chair." Caught in the momentum of the moment, the waiters obeyed. They lifted the wheelchair, with Arthur in it, up the 4 stairs onto the stage. I followed close behind. We were on her level now. The stage was bright, blindingly so. I could feel the heat of the spotlights on my skin. I stood next to Arthur as the waiters set him down center stage, right next to Clarissa. Up close, the cracks in her perfection were visible. Her makeup was a little too heavy to hide the dark circles of stress. Her perfume was overpowering, trying to mask the scent of nervous sweat. "Make it quick, Arthur," Clarissa hissed under her breath, away from the microphone. "Don't embarrass me, or I will have you thrown into the snow." Arthur ignored her. He reached out and took the microphone from her hand. His grip was firm. He sat there for a moment, looking out at the sea of faces. 500 of the most powerful people in Chicago were staring at him. He took a breath, his chest rattling slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur began, his voice booming through the speakers, rich and steady. "Shareholders, friends, you have come here tonight to celebrate 50 years of Titanium Estates. You have come to toast the legacy of the Hartwood family." He paused. The room was so quiet you could hear the ice melting in the glasses. "I, too, am here to speak of legacy," Arthur continued. "I am here to speak of the true cost of what you see around you. Clarissa has told you about the future. She has told you about skyline dreams." Arthur turned his head slowly to look at Clarissa. She was standing a few feet away, her smile frozen, her eyes darting around nervously. She sensed the shift in the air. She sensed the trap, but it was too late. "But a future built on a lie is not a dream," Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming darker, more ominous. "It is a nightmare, and tonight we are going to wake up." He looked at me and nodded. I stepped forward. Reaching into the inner pocket of my white jacket, I pulled out a folded document. It wasn't a speech. It was the legal petition we had filed an hour ago with the emergency court. Clarissa saw the paper. Her eyes widened. She recognized the blue legal backing. "What are you doing?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Give me that microphone back." "No," I said, my voice soft but amplified by the mic Arthur held. "It's my turn to speak. Sister." I looked out at the audience. I saw the faces of the people who had watched me leave my parents' funeral with nothing. I saw the bankers who had rejected my job applications. I saw the friends who had deleted my number. "My name is Fiona Hartwood," I said. "And 3 weeks ago, my sister told you I needed a lesson in humility. She told you I was worth $0. I took a step toward the center of the stage. She was wrong. Clarissa lunged for the microphone, forgetting her poise, forgetting the cameras. "Cut the sound! Cut the mic!" she screamed at the sound booth. But the sound engineer, entranced by the drama, didn't move. Arthur held the microphone out of her reach. Handing it to me, I took it. It felt heavy, like a weapon. I turned to Clarissa. The audience gasped as the facade of the loving sisters shattered completely on stage. "You wanted to teach me about value, Clarissa," I said into the mic, my voice ringing through the hall. "Let's talk about value. Let's talk about the value of the Verity Trust." Clarissa froze. The color drained from her face so fast she looked like a corpse. She knew the name. She knew what it meant. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a storm that was about to break the world apart. The name Verity Trust hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Clarissa blinked, her mouth opening and closing in a silent rhythm that betrayed her panic. For the first time in her life, the script had been burned, and she had no teleprompter to save her. She looked at the audience, then at Arthur, and finally at me. Her eyes were wide, the pupils dilated in the harsh stage lights. "The Verity Trust," she repeated, her voice trembling slightly before she caught herself. She let out a laugh, but it was too high, too sharp. It sounded like glass breaking. "Ladies and gentlemen, please, this is absurd. My sister has clearly had a mental break. She is inventing ghost stories. Security, remove them, now." 2 guards stepped forward from the wings, looking uncertain. "Stay back," Arthur commanded. He did not shout, but his voice had the weight of iron. He reached into the leather satchel resting on his lap and pulled out the diary. He held it up. Not as a sentimental keepsake, but as a piece of evidence. "This is not a ghost story, Clarissa," Arthur said, his tone dropping to the clinical. Devastating register of a prosecutor. "This is the corporate charter, And I'm about to read the clause that you have spent the last 3 weeks violating." He opened the book. He didn't need to search for the page. He knew exactly where it was. "Clause 4, Arthur read, his voice amplifying through the ballroom speakers, drowning out the murmurs of the confused crowd. "The humility of the leader, subsection B." He looked up over his reading glasses, scanning the room to ensure everyone was listening. "If the designated heir to the Hartwood fortune utilizes their power to disenfranchise, impoverish, or publicly humiliate a direct blood descendant of Margaret Hartwood, based on arrogance or malice, said heir shall immediately forfeit all rights to the estate." A collective gasp went through the room. It was the sound of 500 people realizing they were witnessing an execution. Arthur continued, reading the legal teeth of the document. "The definition of disenfranchise includes the deprivation of housing, the blocking of employment, and the intentional destruction of reputation. Upon proof of such actions, the assets of Titanium Estates shall revert to the control of the Verity Trust, to be administered by the victim of said arrogance, who shall serve as the new guardian of the legacy." Clarissa stared at him. The blood had drained from her face, leaving her makeup standing out like war paint. She gripped the podium so hard her knuckles were white. "That is a lie," she spat into her microphone. "That book is a dusty old diary. It has no legal standing. My grandmother died 15 years ago. Whatever she wrote in her kitchen while baking cookies does not supersede the will my parents signed last month." She turned to the crowd, her arms wide, appealing to their cynicism. "You see? This is pathetic. My sister is jealous. She was left nothing because she is incompetent. And now she digs up some senile ramblings to try and steal what I earned. It is a forgery. It is a joke." "Is it?" I asked, stepping forward. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small USB drive. It was sleek, silver, and looked innocuous, but it contained the digital files that Arthur's proxy had retrieved from the Zurich vault just 24 hours ago. I walked over to the podium. Clarissa tried to block me, but I simply looked at her. "Do you really want to physically fight me on stage in front of the press?" I whispered. "Think about your stock price." "Clarissa." She flinched and stepped back. I plugged the drive into the presentation laptop connected to the podium. The screen behind us, which had been displaying the stoic black and white photo of our parents, flickered. "You say Grandma Margaret was senile?" I asked the room, my voice steady. "You say this is a forgery? Let's ask her." I hit the spacebar. The giant LED screen went black for a second. Then, an image appeared. The quality was grainy, shot on a camcorder from 20 years ago, but the face was unmistakable. Margaret Hartwood sat in her favorite high-backed armchair in the library of the old manor. She was wearing her signature pearl necklace and a blue cardigan. She looked straight into the camera lens, her eyes sharp and clear. The room fell deadly silent. Even the waiter stopped moving. "My name is Margaret Hartwood," the woman on the screen said. Her voice was younger, stronger than I remembered, but filled with that familiar warmth. "The date is January 5th, 2006. I am recording this statement in the presence of my attorney, Arthur Sterling. To accompany the filing of the original covenant in the Zurich depository." Clarissa let out a small, strangled sound. She looked at the screen as if she were seeing a ghost. "I built this company on the soil of Chicago," Margaret continued on the screen. "But soil can shift, and people can change. I fear that my son, Richard, has forgotten where he came from. He mistakes wealth for worth, and I fear he is passing this sickness to his eldest daughter." "Clarissa." The camera zoomed in slightly on Margaret's face. "So, I am leaving a failsafe. This company does not belong to the strongest. It belongs to the one who keeps the heart. If the day comes when my family turns on its own, if they use my money to crush their own blood, then the money is no longer theirs." Margaret leaned forward, staring across 2 decades of time, straight into the eyes of the stunned audience. "If this clause is activated, it means my worst fears have come to true. It means Clarissa has lost her way, and it means that Fiona, my quiet, kind, fierce Fiona, is the only one left to save us. To Fiona, I leave the Verity Trust. To Fiona, I leave the burden and the glory of correcting the mistakes of her kin. The video cut to black. For 3 seconds, there was no sound in the ballroom. No one breathed. The silence was absolute, a vacuum created by the sudden, undeniable presence of the truth. Then, Arthur slammed a stack of documents onto the podium. The sound cracked like a gavel. "These," Arthur announced, his voice thundering, "are the notarized affidavits from the Zurcher Kantonalbank, stamped yesterday. They verify the authenticity of the video and the original covenant. They are signed by the International Banking Authority." He pointed a shaking finger at the man standing in the front row, Clarissa's lead counsel, a sharp-suited man named Mr. Vance, who had been smirking 10 minutes ago. "Mr. Vance," Arthur called out, "I suggest you come up here and examine the seals. You know international probate law. You know that a Swiss irrevocable trust supersedes a domestic will, especially when the domestic will was executed under the violation of a pre-existing covenant." "Mr." Vance looked at Clarissa, then at the documents. He loosened his tie. He walked up the stairs to the stage, his steps heavy. He didn't look at Clarissa. He walked straight to the podium and picked up the papers Arthur had thrown down. Clarissa grabbed his arm. "Tell them it's fake, Vance. Tell them it's a deep fake. The video is AI. It's computer-generated." Vance ignored her. He flipped through the pages. He looked at the raised seals. He looked at the watermarks. He took out a small jeweler's loupe from his pocket and examined the signatures. The room waited. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Finally, Vance lowered the papers. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at Clarissa with a mixture of pity and professional detachment. "It is real," Vance said. His voice picked up by the microphone. "The dates match. The seals are authentic. The trust was established 20 years ago. It holds the controlling deed to the land Titanium Estates is built on." He turned to Clarissa. "Technically, Ms. Hartwood, you are currently trespassing on your sister's property." Clarissa recoiled, as if he had slapped her. "No!" she screamed. The sound was raw, primal. It wasn't the voice of a CEO. It was the voice of a child who had been told playtime was over. "This is mine. I am the heir. Mother and father left it to me. They said I was the strong one. They said Fiona was weak." She grabbed the microphone stand, shaking it violently. "They told me to do it. They wrote the letter. They told me to teach her a lesson. It was their idea. They wanted me to crush her so she would toughen up. I only did what they told me." The confession rang out through the hall. She had just admitted it. She had admitted that the humiliation was calculated. She had admitted that she had followed the instructions to crush me. She had just verbally confirmed the exact conditions required to trigger the clause Arthur had read. "And that," I said, stepping up to the microphone one last time, "is exactly why you lost." I looked at her, and for a moment, the anger faded, replaced by a profound sadness. She was a monster, yes, but she was a monster made by our parents. They had hollowed her out and filled her with ambition until there was no humanity left. "You thought the lesson was for me, Clarissa," I said softly, addressing her directly in front of the silent crowd. "You thought humility meant being poor. But humility isn't about money. It is about knowing that you are not God. It is about knowing that you serve the people, not the other way around. Grandma tried to teach Dad. Dad refused to learn. And now, you have failed the final exam." Clarissa looked around the room, searching for an ally. But the faces that looked back at her were cold. The investors were already texting their lawyers. The politicians were looking at the exits. The sycophants were backing away. "Vance!" Clarissa shrieked, grabbing her lawyer's lapels. "Fix this! Sue them! Freezing order! Do something!" Vance gently but firmly removed her hands from his suit. "I cannot sue the lawful owner of the company for taking possession of her assets. Clarissa, and given the fraud regarding the Vanguard loan that came to light this morning." He paused, looking at me. He knew. I had leaked the fraudulent loan documents to the press an hour before the gala. I think my firm will be resigning from your representation effective immediately. We do not represent clients who commit wire fraud. Clarissa staggered back. She looked at the giant screen where Grandma Margaret's face was frozen in a calm, judgmental stare. She looked at the audience. She looked at the ruins of her life. Then, the panic broke. She let out a scream of pure, unadulterated rage. She grabbed a champagne glass from a passing waiter who had wandered onto the stage and hurled it at me. The glass shattered on the floor inches from my feet. "I hate you!" she screamed, tears streaming down her face, ruining the silver perfection of her gown. "I hate you! You were always the favorite, even when they said you were useless. They still loved you. They never loved me. They just wanted a soldier." She fell to her knees, sobbing. It was an ugly, messy breakdown. The great Clarissa Hartwood, the titan of real estate, was reduced to a weeping child in a puddle of spilled champagne and broken glass. Flashbulbs popped. The press, who had been sneaked in by Sarah Jenkins, were capturing every second of it. This was the photo that would be on the front page of every newspaper in America tomorrow morning. The fallen queen. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I felt a heavy weight settle on my shoulders. I walked over to Arthur. He was watching Clarissa with a grim expression. "It is done," he whispered. "Not yet," I said. I turned to the microphone. The room was still watching me. They were waiting for the victory lap. They were waiting for me to dance on her grave. "The party is over," I said simply. "Please leave. Titanium Estates is under new management, and we have a lot of work to do, starting with an apology to the people my sister tried to bury." I signaled to the security guards, the same ones who had tried to stop me earlier. They looked at me, then at Clarissa sobbing on the floor, then back at me. They recognized the shift in power. "Escort Ms. Hartwood off the stage," I ordered, "and call the police. I believe there are federal agents waiting in the lobby to speak with her about a $50 million loan fraud." As the guards moved to lift Clarissa, she didn't fight. She just wept, her body limp, her silver dress trailing on the floor like a broken wing. I watched her go. The lesson in humility had been delivered, but the tuition had been higher than anyone could have imagined. "Wait," I said. The word was not shouted, but it cut through the sobbing of my sister and the murmurs of the crowd like a razor blade. The security guards, who were in the process of awkwardly lifting Clarissa by her elbows, froze. Clarissa looked up at me, mascara streaking down her cheeks in jagged black lines. For a fleeting second, a spark of hope ignited in her eyes. She thought I was going to show mercy. She thought the soft Fiona, the sister who used to rescue spiders from the bathtub, was about to intervene and save her from total destruction. She was wrong. That Fiona had died in the snow outside the manor 3 weeks ago. "You do not get to leave yet," I said, my voice magnified by the speakers, echoing off the gold leaf ceiling. "We have established that you stole the company. We have established that you defrauded a lender, but the world needs to know that you were also willing to kill for it." Clarissa's face went from pale to gray. She shook her head frantically, mouthing the word no, but I was already turning back to the laptop on the podium. "Mr. Tech Director," I said to the invisible man in the sound booth. "File folder number 2, please." The giant screen behind me, which had been displaying the damning visage of our grandmother, blinked. A new image appeared. It was not a nostalgic home video this time. It was a high-resolution photograph of a document with a red stamp that read, "Critical Failure Warning." The room, which had been buzzing with the scandal of the will, suddenly went cold. The air grew heavy with a different kind of tension. This was not family drama anymore. This was something darker. "This," I announced, pointing to the screen, "is the geotechnical survey for the Skyline Dreams project, the project that many of you in this room have invested millions of dollars into, the project that Clarissa claimed was the future of Chicago." I clicked the remote. The image zoomed in on the paragraph I had read in the freezing trailer only nights before. Soil liquefaction. Probability, 90%. Structural integrity at 70 stories, compromised. Recommendation, do not build. A gasp rippled through the audience. I saw a man in the front row, the CEO of the pension fund that had backed the construction loan, stand up, his hand clutching his chest. She knew, I said. Clarissa knew the ground was unstable. She knew the foundation would crack. She knew that in a high wind, or a minor tremor, that building would become a glass coffin for thousands of people. I clicked again. The screen displayed the memo with Clarissa's signature, the sweeping, arrogant blue ink that authorized the use of cheap chemical stabilizers to hide the problem. Override authorized. Pour the concrete. Schedule is priority. She signed this, I said, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. She traded human lives for a ribbon-cutting ceremony. She traded safety for a stock bump. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. It started with a low rumble, like distant thunder, and then exploded into chaos. The polite veneer of the gala disintegrated. These were not just spectators anymore. They were victims. They were accomplices. "My money!" someone shouted from the back. "She took my pension fund!" "Call the lawyers!" another voice screamed. "Freeze the accounts!" The ballroom transformed into a trading floor during a crash. 500 phones lit up simultaneously. People were shouting into their devices, their faces twisted in panic. The waiters were shoved aside as bankers and investors rushed toward the exits, desperate to get a signal, desperate to dump their shares before the opening bell the next morning. But the market was already reacting. On the side of the stage, a large digital ticker that had been set up to display the company's stock price as a celebratory prop began to flash red. It was tracking the after-hours trading on the international markets. The news had hit the wire. TTE, minus 10%. TTE, minus 25%. TTE, minus 40%. The numbers tumbled like stones falling down a cliff. In the span of 3 minutes, billions of dollars in market capitalization evaporated. The empire that my father had built, and that Clarissa had gilded with lies, was turning to dust in real time. Clarissa watched the screen, her eyes wide and vacant. She wasn't looking at the people she had swindled. She was watching her net worth hit zero. She was watching her identity dissolve. "You did this," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of the crowd. "You burned it all down." "I didn't burn it," I replied, looking down at her. "I just turned on the lights. You were the one holding the matches." Then, the doors to the ballroom burst open with a force that shook the walls. It wasn't the hotel security this time. It was a phalanx of men and women in blue windbreakers with yellow lettering on the back. FBI, SEC. They moved with the precision of a wolf pack. They didn't care about the champagne or the tuxedos. They parted the crowd of panicked millionaires like water. "Federal agents," a voice boomed. "Nobody move." The chaos suspended for a heartbeat. The lead agent, a tall woman with a face of stone, marched straight toward the stage. She held a warrant in her hand. "Clarissa Hartwood," the agent announced. "You are under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, falsification of safety records, and grand larceny." Clarissa scrambled backward, crawling on the stage floor like a trapped animal. She looked for an escape route, but there was nowhere to go. To the left was the wheelchair of the man she had tried to erase. To the right was the sister she had tried to destroy. In front of her were the police. Behind her was the screen showing her crimes. Panic, raw and ugly, took hold of her. She lunged toward me. It happened so fast the agents couldn't stop her. She grabbed the hem of my white trousers, her fingernails digging into the fabric. She wasn't attacking me. She was begging. Fiona, please," she shrieked, her voice cracking into a sob. "Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them I didn't mean it. I am your sister. We are blood. You can't let them take me to prison. I will die in there." I looked down at her. This was the woman who had stood on this very stage an hour ago and mocked me. This was the woman who had kicked me out into the snow. This was the woman who had smirked while reading the letter that left me penniless. "Please," she wailed, snot and tears mixing on her face. "I will give you half. I will give you everything. Just tell them to stop. Tell them we can work it out." When I didn't answer, her desperation curdled instantly into hatred. The mask slipped off completely. "You bitch!" she screamed, her face twisting into a demonic snarl. She tried to claw her way up my leg to strike me. "You ungrateful, jealous little rat! I should have killed you. I should have burned that house down with you inside it. You ruined everything. I am the Heartwood. I am the queen. You are nothing. Nothing." Two agents tackled her. They pulled her off me, forcing her face into the polished wood of the stage. She thrashed and kicked, screaming obscenities that would make a sailor blush. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was the loudest sound in the room. Click, click, click. They hauled her to her feet. Her dress was torn. Her hair was a bird's nest. She looked wild, feral, and utterly broken. The lead agent looked at me. "Ms. Heartwood, are you all right?" I smoothed the fabric of my trousers where she had grabbed me. I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. The fear was gone. The anger was gone. There was only clarity. I stepped closer to Clarissa. The agents held her back, but she stopped screaming. She just breathed heavily, staring at me with eyes full of poison. "You wanted to teach me a lesson, Clarissa," I said softly. I didn't need the microphone anymore. The room was deathly silent, watching the final act of the tragedy. "You and Mom and Dad, you left me $0 in a letter. You called it a lesson in humility." I leaned in close, so she could see the absolute lack of pity in my eyes. "Well, I am returning the inheritance," I said. "I am taking back the company. I am taking back the house. I am taking back the name. I am taking back everything." I paused, letting the words sink into her mind. "Everything," I whispered. "Except the lesson. I am letting you keep that. You can learn about humility in a 6x8 cell. I hear the federal penitentiary is very grounding." Clarissa's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The reality finally hit her. There was no lawyer coming to save her. There was no check she could write to fix this. She was going to prison. "Get her out of here," I said to the agents. They began to march her away. The press, sensing the money shot, surged forward. Flashbulbs erupted like a lightning storm. Pop, pop, pop. Clarissa tried to hide her face, but it was too late. The image of the golden girl in handcuffs, disheveled and weeping, was being beamed to every news outlet in the world. She was dragged down the stairs, past the investors she had defrauded, past the employees she had fired, and out through the double doors. The doors swung shut behind her with a heavy thud. The room remained silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, eyes began to turn back to the stage. To me. I stood alone in the spotlight. To my left, Arthur sat in his wheelchair, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. He nodded to me. A single, slow dip of his chin. Well done. I looked up at the digital ticker. The stock price had bottomed out. The company was technically worthless. The brand was toxic. The projects were dead. But as I looked out at the ruin of the Heartwood Empire, I didn't see destruction. I saw a construction site. I saw cleared ground. The fake empire had collapsed in 60 minutes. The lies were gone. The rot was exposed. I walked over to the podium and picked up the microphone one last time. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice tired but steady, "the gala is canceled, but the work is just beginning. Go home. Tomorrow, we start rebuilding, and this time, we build on rock, not sand." I placed the microphone down. It made a soft thud. I walked over to Arthur, unlocked the brakes of his wheelchair, and began to push him off the stage. We didn't leave through the back. We went down the stairs and walked right down the center aisle, through the debris of the party. People moved out of our way. Not with the polite indifference of the beginning of the night, but with a mixture of fear and respect. They weren't looking at the outcast anymore. They were looking at the survivor. As we reached the doors, I looked back one last time at the empty stage and the shattered glass on the floor. The spotlight was still shining on the empty space where Clarissa had stood. "Goodbye, sister," I whispered. I pushed the doors open and walked out into the cool, clean air of the Chicago night. The nightmare was over. The morning was coming. It has been 6 months since the night the glass ceiling of the Palmer House Hotel ballroom shattered, bringing down the false sky of the Heartwood Empire with it. Chicago feels different to me now. The winter has finally retreated, replaced by a humid, vibrant summer that smells of wet pavement and blooming hydrangeas. The city is the same, but the way I move through it has changed completely. I am no longer the ghost haunting the edges of the frame. I am the architect of the picture. The first thing I did after the dust settled was to take a sledgehammer, figuratively, and in the case of the lobby sign, literally, to the name Titanium Estates. The name sounded too much like a weapon. It was cold. It was impenetrable. It was everything my father and Clarissa wanted to be. We are now Heartwood Heritage. I moved the executive offices out of the penthouse. That space, with its panoramic views that encouraged looking down on people, has been converted into a communal break area and a library for the staff. My office is on the 3rd floor. I like being close to the street. I like being able to hear the traffic and see the faces of the people walking by. It reminds me of who we are building for. The Skyline Dreams project is dead. We filled in the pit. We stabilized the ground. And on that plot of land, we are not building a luxury tower for billionaires who live in Dubai. We are building the Margaret Commons, a mixed-income housing development designed with sustainable materials and anchored by a public park. It will not make us $1 billion, but it will house 300 families safely, and that is a profit margin I can sleep with. I also kept my promise to the victims of arrogance. I established the Verity Fund. We took the liquidation assets from Clarissa's personal estate, the cars, the jewelry, the vacation homes she bought with embezzled money, and put every cent of it into a legal defense fund. It is designed to help people who have been disinherited, bullied, or financially abused by their own families. We hired a team of lawyers who specialize in probate fraud. We are giving teeth to the lambs. But victory, I have learned, always comes with a price. Arthur Sterling did not live to see the first shovel hit the dirt at the Margaret Commons. The excitement of the gala, the travel, and the sheer force of will he exerted to save me took their toll. He passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 weeks after the confrontation. I was there when they read his will. It was short, precise, and lacked the cruelty of my parents' final decree. He left his estate to the nursing home in Vermont to improve their facilities. And to me, he left a small velvet box. Inside was his fountain pen. It was a Mont Blanc Meisterstück from 1955, the black resin worn smooth by decades of drafting contracts and fighting for justice. There was a note tucked under the clip. "Dear Fiona, the pen is mightier than the sword, but only if the hand holding it is steady. You have a steady hand. Write the future, and do not forget to visit the mountains every now and then. The air is better up there. I keep the pen on my desk. I use it to sign every check, every deed, and every welcome letter to a new tenant. It is my reminder that I am never truly working alone. Then, there is Clarissa. She is currently inmate number 7492 at the Federal Correctional Institution in Greenville. The judge was not lenient. The evidence of wire fraud and the willful negligence regarding the safety of the Skyline project was overwhelming. She was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of probation. I did not visit her for the first 5 months. I couldn't. The anger was still too raw, and I was busy trying to salvage the company she had nearly destroyed. But last week, I drove down to Greenville. The visiting room was sterile, smelling of industrial cleaner and hopelessness. When the guard brought her out, I barely recognized her. The Clarissa I knew was painted in gold and silver, armored in designer silk. This woman wore a shapeless khaki uniform. Her hair, once chemically straightened and dyed a fierce blonde, was growing out in its natural, dull brown shade. She looked smaller, She looked human. She sat down on the other side of the plexiglass. She didn't pick up the phone immediately. She just stared at me, her eyes searching my face for something. Maybe mockery, maybe pity. I picked up the receiver. She followed suit. "You look good," she said, her voice raspy. "White suits you." "You look sober," I replied. She let out a short, dry laugh. "Not much champagne in here. The toilet wine is terrible." We sat in silence for a moment. The air between us was heavy with the ghosts of our parents and the wreckage of the last year. "I saw the news," she said, looking down at her hands. "You gave away the Aspen House. You turned it into a retreat for, what was it? Struggling artists?" "For writers," I corrected. "Writers who can't afford rent. Mom always hated artists. I thought it was fitting." Clarissa shook her head. "You are wasting the assets. Fiona, you could be a billionaire by now if you just leveraged the portfolio properly." "I am not interested in being a billionaire. Clarissa, I am interested in being able to look at myself in the mirror." She looked up at me then, and I saw a flash of the old fire, but it was dim, suffocated by her reality. "Why didn't you stop them?" she asked. The question was a whisper, fragile and sharp. "You have the best lawyers in the city now. You own the company. You could have pulled strings. You could have gotten the charges reduced. You could have kept me out of here." "I could have," I admitted. "Then why?" she demanded, her hand hitting the metal counter. "We are sisters. Doesn't that mean anything?" "It means everything," I said calmly. "It means I love you enough to let you finally learn the one thing Mom and Dad never taught you." "What?" she spat. "Cruelty?" "No," I said. "Consequence." I leaned closer to the glass. "You spent your whole life thinking you were above the rules because of your last name. You thought people were disposable. You thought safety was optional. You thought family was something you could bankrupt for a tax write-off. If I saved you, if I used my money to buy your freedom, I would just be Richard Hartwood in a skirt. I would be proving that money makes you immune to justice." Clarissa stared at me, her mouth slightly open. "This," I said, gesturing to the gray walls around us, "is the lesson in humility. Clarissa, it isn't about being poor. I have money now, and I am still humble. Humility is knowing that you are not God. It is knowing that when you break something, you have to pay for it. You are paying your debt, and when you get out, if you have truly learned that, I will be waiting. But not a moment before." I hung up the phone. I didn't wait for her to respond. I walked out of the prison and into the bright sunlight, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the shadow of my big sister casting darkness over me. I felt only the warmth of the sun. Yesterday, I returned to the manor. I am not living there. It is too big, too full of echoes. I am converting the main house into the headquarters for the Verity Fund, and the grounds will be open to the public. But I went up to the attic one last time. It was exactly as I had left it on the day of the funeral. Dusty, quiet, smelling of dry wood. The loose floorboard was still there. I sat down on the floor. I had the wooden box with me. I opened it. Inside, I placed Arthur's pen. I placed a copy of the new deed for the Margaret Commons. And then, I took out the old diary. I ran my hand over the leather cover. This book had changed the world. It had toppled a tyrant. It had saved my life. But its work was done. It belonged to history now. I placed it gently back into the box. Then, I took out a new book. It was a simple journal with a black cover. On the first page, I had written a single entry. Date: July 15th, 2026. The storm is over. The house is clean. We are no longer building for the height of the tower, but for the depth of the roots. My name is Fiona Hartwood, and I'm just getting started. I placed my new journal next to my grandmother's, 2 generations of women who had refused to let silence be their legacy. I closed the lid of the wooden box and locked it. I didn't hide it under the floorboards this time. I placed it on the shelf, right next to the window, where the light could hit it. We are done with hiding. I walked downstairs and out into the garden. The landscaping crew had just finished replanting the rose beds that my mother had neglected for years. The air was thick with the scent of earth and new growth. I stood in the center of the garden, closing my eyes. I felt a breeze brush against my cheek. It wasn't the biting, icy wind of the cemetery. It was a warm, gentle breath. It felt like a hand resting on my shoulder. "I did it. Grandma," I whispered. "We are home." I opened my eyes and looked straight ahead, past the garden, past the gates, toward the city that lay beyond. My journey from the girl who was left $0 to the woman who owns her own destiny was paved with betrayal, fear, and cold nights. But it was worth every step. I hope my story tells you something. I hope it tells you that your worth is not a number on a bank statement. I hope it tells you that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, will always find a way to the surface if you have the courage to dig for it. Don't ever let anyone price you at zero. You are invaluable. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please remember to subscribe to the Blue Payback channel so you never miss a video. Thank you so much for listening to my story on Sunday Drama Stories. Please comment down below where you are tuning in from. Hit that like button. And smash the hype button to help this story reach more people who need to hear it.